So as you know, hundreds of people have been displaced, as Sipamandla was showing you in Ladysmith in KwaZulu-Natal. The uThukela River and some of its tributaries burst their banks at the weekend and over the last few days, really. Now, this has affected communities and towns on the banks of the uThukela River. At least 25 people have lost their lives and 2 are still reported missing in flooding in KwaZulu-Natal. To discuss the problems in Ladysmith, I have flood resilience expert Tjeerd Driessen, who joins me now in studio for that conversation. Tjeerd, thank you for joining me. I appreciate your time. So the Ladysmith Dam is the reason why I invited you here. As the name suggests, you know, it's meant to mitigate flooding and basically mitigate the misery brought on by the flooding. And it talks to the history of that area, Ladysmith. And over the days, we saw that it was being tracked, whether it was performing its functions. So there were updates that were saying if it's at 9-meter mark, it means it's still doing its task of preventing flooding further downstream. Just flood mitigation dams as a concept. How widespread is it, and what is the concept behind constructing a whole dam for the purpose of flood mitigation?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Well, I mean, the concept is used all over the world, so that's not a new thing. I think what we saw now in Ladysmith is also that indeed it functioned as it was planned. So the dam that we're speaking of is upstream, so upstream of Ladysmith. And you saw actually after the rainfall on the 12th, on the 15th and on the 16th of January, that water was actually coming down the Klip River, and at a certain point it started ponding. So it started to retain water upstream of the dam to ensure that not all the water at once flows down the river along Ladysmith, but it actually retains there for some while, and that the water is able to flow down or discharge downstream of the river in a slower movement.
Yeah. So is this to say then, Tjeerd, that had the dam not been there, the situation could have been worse?
Yeah, I think so. Especially also over the last years, we've seen many floods in Ladysmith. I think the issue already is there for about 100 years already. This dam was created in the late 90s also as a result of the frequent floodings that the Ladysmith was experiencing. And indeed, if you listen to the report from the citizens in Ladysmith, they are also saying, well, we actually got less flooding because of this dam, or since the dam is actually being built in the late 90s.
Yeah. So just also, I know that you've been looking at the topography of the area around Ladysmith in relation to where the dam is located, but also other tributaries of the uThukela River. What is the picture that emerges there that perhaps helps us understand why Ladysmith continues to be prone to flooding?
Yeah. First, to come back to my previous answer, indeed the dam helps to prevent flooding from the Klip River, so water coming down from the catchment in the river. But flooding also emerges due to local flooding in the CBD of Ladysmith itself. So especially in the early days, so last week on the 12th and on the 15th of January, we had some heavy extreme rainfall events in the city itself. And then also flooding can occur, like ponding of water. That is actually a result of, can the stormwater system drain the water? So that is also one cause of potential flooding. Coming back to your question on the dam and the tributaries that are playing a role, you have the dam upstream that retains water, so it slows down the movement of water down the river. But also, when the water passes the dam, there's still also a tributary, quite a significant tributary also joining the Klip River before it moves to Ladysmith, and it's called the Fourie-Spruit. And, well, there might also be signs that that tributary also discharges more water than we would expect.
Yeah. So at this point, having constructed a whole dam and launched it in 1997, what else can be done to try and mitigate? Because uThukela is a significant river, and its tributaries also pack a punch whenever it rains. What else can be done to try and mitigate? And Ladysmith is on a floodplain, is it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think I already mentioned some aspects, a tributary, a dam, a stormwater. So in order to come up with solutions, I think it's critical to first have a good flood study that actually looks at, okay, what are the causes of flooding and what do we need to look at? So is it the dam? Is it the tributary? Do we need to look at maybe the stormwater system itself? Is it maintained? Is it properly draining water to the river? Because also there might be issues. So those are all the solutions that you might think of. But in order to come up with the concrete and right solutions, we need to have a study first to get a deeper understanding of what the reasons are.
Yeah. And this aspect around the stormwater drainage, it's, you know, in terms of it being a municipal infrastructure, it's not something you notice every day. It's not like a traffic light that once the traffic light is not working, you will immediately know. But you'd never know how important it is until you need it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Your overall sense of stormwater infrastructure from just your observations, not only in Ladysmith, but in various municipalities, cities and towns in South Africa?
Well, I think in general, my observation is that generally, I think one can say that these systems are poorly maintained. So they're built maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago, but the maintenance is lacking often. We see that maintenance actually is also important because waste is accumulating in those systems. So you see channels or culverts or bridges actually clogged with all kind of waste. So that is an obstruction that we need to take care of. And also with climate change, it's extra important that we look at our infrastructure and see, okay, can we ensure that we design our infrastructure also in such a way that it is resilient for climate change events. Yeah. So maybe this week we have the Ladysmith rainfall, but maybe in 5 years it will be more severe. Can the system still cope with that? Yeah. So that's why we need to also think of climate resilience in that sense.
Tjeerd, let me take advantage of the fact that I have you here. And we had the conversation off air, and full disclosure, this is not the reason I invited you. So I didn't ask you to prepare for this particular conversation. Every time I see flooding, and this is in the nature of how I do things and how I think, I always go back to other incidents. Centurion, 2019, November, December, thereabouts.
Yeah.
Severe flooding. People are rescued from hotels with helicopters, military helicopters, etc. Outrage generally about the state of maintenance of infrastructure. But also we learned that Centurion has always been prone to flooding because it's on a floodplain. The floods go away, the conversation goes away.
Yeah.
It's risky, is it not, that we as South Africans, just taking Centurion as an example, that continues to bug me as a citizen, it's risky that we don't focus on these issues of towns and cities built on a floodplain, then coupled with infrastructure not well maintained. Yeah. Your thinking around that?
Well, I mean that's also the main issue that we're seeing in South Africa, but also, of course, in Africa on the continent, is that urbanization is thriving. So you see more people going to the city. And what we see is that spatial planning of those cities is not catching up, right? So you see settlements on places where they maybe should not settle. And especially also in South Africa, you see that, for example, informal settlements are mostly located on low flood-prone areas alongside rivers. I mean, also here in Johannesburg, also you see that in Alexandra, for example. So good spatial planning is key in that sense. But it's a whole package. It's not just the planning. It's also about the maintenance. It's about future-proofing your system. And also seeing, okay, how can we deal with the water upstream? Can we retain it? Can we store more water upstream? Because if we don't do it, there will be flash floods and water will come down the river very fast, and also on places that you don't want it to be flooded.
Tjeerd Driessen, thank you. I've got to thank you for your time and your insights here on eNCA. He is a flood resilience expert and was talking to me about the situation from an engineering perspective.